Hello everyone, and welcome to the short video Building Resilience with IT and OT Security. My name is Ewald Munz from Splunk, and I look after the manufacturing business in EMEA. Before I start, please let me highlight the so-called forward-looking statements because there are a few of them in this presentation. In this presentation, I'd like to cover 3 points. I would like to start first about some key market trends and best practices, followed, of course, most importantly, how Splunk adds value. And of course, I would like to also add some customer stories. What have we done in this area? So talking about OT security, if you look, let's say, at Google, if you ask Google about OT security, you can see that the interest is basically exploding since the past few years, same with the so-called NIS2 directive. And the NIS2 is very important, especially in the OT security context, because basically the objective is to boost the overall level of cybersecurity and to nudge companies to modernize their security environment. And basically, it's quite a sharp sword. So there's a personal liability of the C-level in case they don't modernize the security posture. And there are also huge penalties up to 10 million. But basically, it means there's a need for unified visibility across IT and OT environments. So NIS2 is very important for OT security specifically. And please let me now highlight 2 best practices when it comes to IT and OT security. So first of all, I would say the word "and" is maybe the most important word when I speak about IT and OT security. We speak here in this context, especially of a so-called IT and OT SOC, so integrated SOC visibility across IT and OT. And please let me highlight why this word "and" is so important, because during a cyber attack, visibility across all the zones is essential. So if you look here at the so-called Perdo model, on the left-hand side, more the enterprise zones with level 4 to 5. On the right-hand side, more the classic OT zones, level 0 to 3. And let's say when a cyber attack happens, it typically happens from the left-hand side, from the enterprise zone. So for example, when an employee clicks on a phishing email, you have won some prize or you have won some holiday or something like that. And in this case, the virus actually moves laterally through the system. You can say it eats itself, so through the system up to the crown jewels, which are typically the control systems where it can lead, for example, to a shutdown or damage something or to some other kind of malicious work. And the key thing is that the attackers are actually very patient. So this movement from left to right is very, very slow. It can take up to half a year or maybe even longer. Yeah, and that's why this visibility across all the zones is very, very important to detect a cyber attack. However, I would say the normality for many companies is that they have blind spots. Of course, the IT SIEM is quite common. Some, let's say, we have OT security vendors in place, like a Dozomi or like a Cybervision or a Claroty, which of course is perfectly fine. But the challenge is here that there's no unified, centralized visibility to detect this virus in the system. And now looking at the classic confusion matrix, the known knowns and known unknowns, of course, the worst spot to be in are the unknown unknowns. So actually worse than being hacked is not knowing that you have been hacked. And obviously, this is the highest risk to your environment. And the second best practice I would like to highlight is how to deal with false alerts. And what we're hearing from our customers that false alerts are really a key challenge in OT environment. They're getting every day 2,000, sometimes even 10,000 false alerts per day. And of course, it's impossible to deal with this high number of false alerts on a daily basis. I mean, the security analysts, they're getting burned out. And of course, they miss them the key notables. So the solution is here. So-called risk-based alerting, a very elegant way to reduce this high number of false alerts, which I will speak about later. Yeah, so in this context, how does Splunk add value now for IT and OT security environments? So I would like to use this analogy of the so-called earthquake-proof towers. They bend, but they don't break. And as you surely know, there are a lot of earthquakes in Japan, and Japan is home to some of the most resilient buildings in the world to tackle this challenge. So how to, let's say, to transfer this kind of analogy to IT and OT security? And I would like to use also this tower kind of analogy to use certain kinds of layers, certain kinds of bricks to build really resilience, especially with OT security. So the foundational kind of layer, the first brick, is this very crucial unified visibility across IT and OT environment, as I mentioned before, followed by a dedicated unified IT/OT SOC, and then followed by specific OT security use cases. And in this context, I would like to highlight especially the remote access, which of course was classic during the COVID pandemic. Then also perimeter monitoring to make it basically visible where there is traffic, where there's no traffic is supposed to be. This is especially important in some kind of a perceived air gapping kind of environment. Then the so-called ICS MITRE-ATT&CK rules. So as you for sure you know, MITRE-ATT&CK exists since many, many years for IT security, whereas for OT security, this only came in place since about 4 or 5 years ago. And of course, we're fully aligned to these new rules. And then the icing of the cake, of course, is orchestration and automation, the risk-based alerting, as I mentioned before. So basically that every event gets a so-called risk probability, and this adds up to a so-called risk score. And only once this risk score hits a certain threshold, only then the plant manager gets an alert. And ultimately, of course, for some customers, to put everything into the cloud. Yeah, so how can help Splunk here? So on the one hand side, we have our market-leading Splunk Enterprise Security theme, the ES, so-called ES, plus a so-called Splunk OT Security add-on. And the good news is this is actually free for enterprise security customers. So it is Splunk Enterprise Security ES plus the Splunk OT Security add-on. You can have this required IT and OT security visibility across all the zones. I would like to highlight also that, let's say, from external kind of assessment, for example, from Forrester, they have clearly highlighted that the Cisco and Splunk are a leader in OT security. And many of the companies you see on this chart, like Nozomi or like a Dragos or like Armis and so on, or like a Claroty, they're not competitors. They're simply data sources for Splunk. So we simply ingest them as the data sources to complement this visibility for our customers. Just to give you some insights here, so on our so-called app store, we call it the Splunk-based, you can have all these kind of integration apps, for example, here for Cisco CyberVision. So you simply go there or log in, and you can download it and use it right. So just to show you here on the Purdo model how this visibility works. So the traditional role of the enterprise team, for example, with IT team or Splunk Enterprise Security, covers the levels or the zones 4 to 5. And the OT security specialists are more active on the right-hand side on the levels, let's say, 0 to 2, which of course is fine, but the challenge is that they are used to work in silos. Yeah. So from Splunk, what they have done now with the OT security add-on the one hand side, we're diving now deeper down the Purdo model up to level 2, and our friends from the right-hand side, we simply ingest as a data source. Yeah? And as a result, customers get this holistic, unified visibility across IT and OT environments from level 0 to 5. To give an example of some required OT data sources, and of course the message is here, it depends for every customer on what kind of journey they are. So for example, very easy first start is to ingest the must-have data sources from the firewall, of course all the event data. And of course, let's say once the customers moves along this maturity journey, you can also ingest nice to have data sources, for example, remote server management logs. Yeah. complement the picture. So there are a lot of specific OT security data sources in this context. Yeah, to sum it up, there are three key benefits of IT and OT security with Splunk I'd like to highlight. So first of all, I would say most importantly, this holistic visibility across IT and OT environments. This is really, really key and best practice. And it doesn't matter if it's on-premise, hybrid, or as a service. This, of course, is most powerful with the central IT and OT SOC. Secondly, the dedicated OT environment coverage. On the one hand side, with implementation of the latest ICS MITRE ATT&CK rules, and of course also with integration of basically all the OT security vendors. So very specialized OT environments coverage. And thirdly, this I would say is more and more important for our customers, so-called automation and orchestration technologies. I mentioned the risk-based alerting, but also orchestration, automation, and response, and of course also a tech analyzer to automatically detect attack vectors. So of course, coming now to the customer's references, maybe to your most important question, have you done this before? And the answer is yes. And I would like to highlight especially our customer, Johnson Matthey in the UK. You may know this company. It's a manufacturer of specialty chemicals. And they basically use everything what Splunk can offer from its security portfolio. They use Splunk Enterprise Security. They use Splunk OT Security. They use Splunk orchestration and automation. They use risk-based alerting. They use Splunk Tech Analyzer. Basically, they use everything what Splunk have to offer, and they're very, very happy with it. You can see some numbers here, how much they've improved their operations. And just to show you here some quotes from our customers, Nathan, who gives some nice quote. And I would say the most important word in this quote is automated or automatically. So this is really, really key in IT and OT context, especially when it comes to future kind of development. So automation is very, very important. But of course, there are also more customers, and you may know our Splunk user conference called the Splunk Conf. And so these are all the links to customer presentations. For example, Saudi Aramco, they shared their lessons learned during COVID, during what they've done with Splunk OT security. In Israel, the Ministry of Energy is user of Splunk OT security since many, many years, and they speak regularly at the events about the latest kind of applications, and actually how happy they are with this service. From Ernst & Young, there's some public presentation about the energy sector, so about the grid, and there's also a railway customer from Australia who also uses Splunk IT and OT security. To finish up, I would like to highlight the two key assets. On the one hand side, there's a blog. OT security is the new Avenger, which clearly describes why OT security is so important for a manufacturer, and of course how to do the next step to implement this. And let's say from a technical perspective, or the so-called Splunk Lantern, there's a solution accelerator for OT security with very technical information, with a hands-on guide to implement IT and OT security from Splunk. And with this, I conclude the session. Thank you very much, and I wish you much success with Splunk IT and OT security.